Last week, I did a big harmonic analysis of a guitar etude by the Brazilian composer Heitor Villa-Lobos. This week, I want to look at another one of his etudes, number 11. This is hands down one of my all-time favorite pieces for solo guitar. It is extremely cool music, and it's very fun to play. It's also pretty challenging to play, but I will say, it's not as hard as it sounds. I think it's always good to have some music in your hands that sounds harder than it is. It helps with impressing audiences. You gotta have some fireworks on standby, right? So with Etude 1, I did a thorough analysis of the chords and how they relate to the larger structure of the piece. This sort of analytical approach won't work as well with Etude 11, or at least it won't be as revealing. Instead, I want to look at how Villa-Lobos approaches a very important component of composition and songwriting, and that is development. A common pitfall for anyone getting into composing and songwriting is coming up with ideas that go nowhere. Everything has to start with an idea, but how do you make your music sound like it actually says something, like it does something, like it goes somewhere? How do you make it sound like it isn't just a bunch of disconnected ideas? Development is how you do that. You don't need a lot of ideas. You only need 2 or 3. Whatever ideas you come up with should be very different from each other. That gives you more room for contrast. It allows you to say more with the music. Once you have your ideas, you present them in the expositional parts of the music, and then you reshape and recontextualize them. Those ideas that continually get reshaped as the music progresses become the thread that ties the whole thing together. How do you learn to do this? By studying what others have done before you. So, let's check out what Villa-Lobos does in Etude 11. This is how the piece starts. Hang there for a second. So up to this point, he has now presented all of his initial ideas. We've heard all the musical, thematic material that everything else is going to be based on. He's given us 2 ideas. First is this slow, somber, lyrical melody in E minor. It's very broad. It leaves a lot of space. And we get some light chords filling in the space. The bass is just alternating between A and E. But the melody is the main idea. That's in the foreground. That's what gets our attention. Once the melody lands on E, he goes into this slightly faster, twisted, almost macabre sort of dance idea. Dissonant chords. The bass is outlining a tritone, and the rhythms are very jerky with a lot of slight variations. It's extremely different from the opening melody. There's not really a melody here, it's just some dissonant chords, and it's very direct and in your face. He's given us 2 contrasting ideas. The contrast is very stark, but I think they link together well, and they're presented in a way that I think is very compelling. So he takes these 2 ideas and repeats them with very slight variation in a few of the rhythms. Now he needs to do something with them. Here's where he goes next. Okay, so this whole section, which we can call the B section, sounds pretty different on the surface from anything we've heard so far. Texturally, all he's doing is forming a melody out of parallel major thirds, sounding against the open G and B strings. And we get these intermittent punctuating arpeggios. Every time this happens, it includes whatever major third he landed on, and the open first, second, third, and sixth strings. The open strings form an E minor chord on their own, which I think is keeping everything tied to the opening stuff in E minor. The parallel major thirds aren't really concerned with what key we're in. They sort of evoke the sound of the whole tone scale, even though they're not really outlining the whole tone scale. But all this time, we're tethered to the key of E minor. But how do the major thirds relate to the opening ideas? I think the biggest clue is right here. This is the main gesture in this section. It starts with a major third on D flat, goes up to F, and then G, and down to C. Starts on D flat, ends on C. Looking back at the creepy chords in the beginning, he's repeatedly stepping from D flat to C while sounding against the open B and E. D flat to C, D flat to C. I think that's the connection. It feels very intentional because he repeats the motion several times in both sections. Except in the B section, he's expanded it into a larger idea. He embellishes it with extra steps in between. He goes way up here, and he flips the direction of his melody. Instead of going up and back down, he starts high, goes down, and comes back up. All of this is development. He's taken a snippet of his initial ideas and reshaped them into this. All right, let's look at the next section. Okay, is that not the coolest thing ever? It should be immediately obvious that all of that is based on the very first melody we heard at the start of the piece. But instead of being somber and distant, it is right up in your face. And how about that texture? What is that even called? The best description I've heard is cross-string tremolo. Tremolo technique is when you arpeggiate a chord with your thumb underneath repeated notes on a higher single string that you repeat with the rest of your fingers. Francisco Tárrega's Recuerdos de la Alhambra is like the quintessential tremolo piece if you want to go listen to it. It starts like this. The difference here with Villa-Lobos is he's taken those repeated higher notes and spread them over multiple strings. So as it starts, I have the open low E, second finger on E on the 7th fret of the 5th string, both of which get raked with the right hand thumb. Then pinky on E at the 9th fret on the 3rd string, index on E at the 5th fret of the 2nd string, and then open, high E. So that's a triple unison on these strings. With just the fretted notes, that's an octave and a unison. He takes that and slides it up and down to play that opening melody. But it's all against the open E's in the midst of this big circular arpeggio pattern in the right hand. Sounds huge, epic, and super metal. As far as I'm concerned, Villa-Lobos stole this texture for himself. No one can ever do this on the guitar again. It's been done, and it was done in the coolest way. But musically, it's pretty obvious what he's doing in terms of development. He's brought back that opening melody in a new context. It's a lot more direct of a development than the previous section with the parallel major thirds. And even that is a level of contrast in and of itself. There are times when it's like, oh, what's he doing here? And others where it's like, oh, I see exactly what he's doing. I've heard this exact thing before. It doesn't take a musician to hear these things. I know I'm explaining technically what's happening to some degree, but you're probably a musician if you're watching this, so those details are probably of some interest to you. But even if you aren't a musician, the technical theory jargon isn't really that important, because it's still possible for you to hear the connections Villa-Lobos is making in this piece. As an average audience member listening to someone perform this, you would pick up on it more subliminally, and you may not have the words to describe what's happening, but the development of those initial ideas is what allows the music to make sense to you in your perception and processing and enjoyment of it. And Villa-Lobos, of course, knew this. He wasn't writing music for only musicians to enjoy. Development is the thing that makes music good to people. If music is lacking development and it's just a bunch of ideas strung together, then it's not really telling a story. It doesn't mean people can't enjoy it, but it's missing what it needs to draw people in and make them relate to it and want to experience it again and again. Anyway, let's look at what the rest of the piece does. So it goes back to a shortened form of the B section, and then returns to the opening ideas before giving us a final gesture with octave A's to octave E's. A to E is just the bass line that was underneath the main melody, so we're basically ending with the foundation. But the B section, coming back, is a smart move. We heard it once, and it had some mysteriousness to it. It wasn't always clear what was happening. It had direction, but it was unpredictable in many ways. When it comes back, it's something we've heard before, so we can relate to it more. It becomes more legitimized to the listener. We don't hear the whole B section again, but that's okay. We don't need to repeat the whole thing. We just need enough to get us back in that space. And then when it goes back to the opening ideas, with a very slick transition, by the way, the whole thing comes home. We started somewhere, we went somewhere else, and we came back. Music goes from here to there and back again. But all the while, those initial ideas were still with us in some shape or form. So there you go. Every songwriter, every composer will tend to handle development of ideas in their own ways. There are loads of ways to develop ideas in music. There's an art to it, in the bigger sense, but at the core of it all is still just mechanics and musical devices. Tools of the trade. How you use them to fulfill your creative vision is up to you. Hopefully that all provided some new perspective for you. Development is a massive topic in music, and it takes years of study and practice to become adept at it. Really, it's a never-ending process, but a second set of ears always helps if you get stuck. Which brings me to the pitch. I teach private guitar and music lessons over Zoom to people around the world. That's how I primarily make a living. I focus on a wide variety of topics with my students, including composition, songwriting, and development of ideas. I have a small number of openings right now, so if that's of interest to you, you can reach out to me directly on whatever platform you're viewing this on, or you can go here. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next one.